All right, welcome everybody to Tea Talks. I'm super excited to see everybody here tonight. Tea Talks or Trans Talks is one of our monthly programs here at Wild Goose Creative. I am the executive director. Wild Goose is a nonprofit community arts organization, and our mission is to build a creative community in Columbus. So we're all about providing space and resources for creatives. So we are currently in the process of moving to a new location in the middle of the Franklinton Arts District. And our space will hopefully be open in April or May of this year. And I'm really excited to have Tea Talks back in the space in person again. It's been nice being able to continue this online, but obviously we would love to see everybody in person. So we're really excited for the future. And if you want to learn more about Wild Goose, you can go to wildgoosecreative.org. And also, if you want to shoot over a quick $5 donation to support Wild Goose and Tea Talks, our Venmo, I'll put that in the chat as well. So thank you all again for being here. And I will hand the mic over to Felicia.
All right, I'm muting myself. Here we go. I'm back. Hello. So, yes, thank you very much, Lydia. And as always, thank you, Wild Goose, for all of your continued support. As we're getting started, again, if you are a guest, please make sure your microphone is muted. That'll help alleviate any kind of feedback as we get started, if there's any kind of noise in the background of you and all that. And thank you so much for that. Okay, so before we get started, we do the typical disclaimers at the beginning of Tea Talks. So Tea Talks or Trans Talks, or as it is long name known, is trans storytelling, seeks to undermine and disarm the discrimination and oppression and violence of and towards trans-identified people, socially, politically, and culturally. The hope is that by sharing our stories with the rest of the LGBTQAI+ and allied communities, and especially those outside of these communities, we can dismantle the ignorance of who we are, thereby fighting against the hate and violence that threaten our basic human inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And for myself as an educator, I personally believe that proper education is key to the success of empathy, which is crucial to understanding. For those who are new to who we are and what we do, please know that there is no wrong way to be transgender. This is a safe space. You are welcome and included here. Your existence matters, and we are not here to judge or exclude anyone. That being said, in our house, there is no hate speak. Hate speak includes, but is not limited to, exclusionary terms, stereotyping, racism, lewd or explicit speak that demeans an individual or a group. We are all unique with special life experiences, so let's be together in our intersectionality with open minds and hearts as we share our experiences as trans people. And please remember to respect this space, the speakers, yourself, and each other. As a note, if at any point you feel triggered or if you feel like you need to take a break, feel free to do so. As this is live, you can always mute and step away if you have to, and then come back if and when you're ready. If you're watching this after the 27th and it's pre-recorded, obviously you can pause. But it's always important that we have boundaries for our own mental health. Finally, we would like to acknowledge that we are living on stolen land. Central Ohio is the traditional home of the Shawnee Nation, Miami, and other indigenous nations who have strong ties to this land. So we are so glad that you are here. And can get started with our program for today, which is transness. With an ever-evolving galaxy of gender identities in the trans universe, this month we meditated on the notion of, am I enough? So do you identify as trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, or question your gender? Do you prefer to identify with other gender non-conforming labels or to go unlabeled? What does that mean for you? What obstacles have you had to traverse in order to live your full truth. Trans people are no stranger to facing and overcoming challenges and complicating matters that are challenges specific to one's intersectional identities. How do we honor the experience we share while at the same time recognizing needs that may be different? How do we welcome all of the voices in our community so that we can support and affirm other trans people in their full truth? It is our beliefs at Tea Talks that all transgender identities, non-binary, transmasculine, transfeminine, two-spirit, gender fluid, gender non-conforming, questioning, bigender, pangender, agender, intersex, um, going on, we are valid under this term. And while there exists many commonalities in our community and many similarities within our life stories, each trans person's experience is subjective and unique to the individual. So tonight, we invite you, our siblings, loved ones, and allies to join us as we share our stories, our personal viewpoints on the exploration of the very beautiful complexity that is, in fact, the trans identity. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Trace. Yes, Trace, it's you. Um, so, uh, anyway, Trace Barber Aguila goes by they, them, theirs pronouns. Trace is the founder of A Thrive Life. They are a two-spirit indigenous healing practitioner, consultant, educator, writer, and death doula. Trace is a transracial adoptee and multi-ethnic of Muisca, Romani Sinti, and Ashkenazi descent. Their practice is focused on education, support, and guidance for grief and trauma healing with movement, mental health, spirituality, creativity, and community. Trace lives and works in the unceded and occupied land of the Lenape, known as Brooklyn, New York. A true Enneagram 8, and I have to admit, I'm not sure what Enneagrams are, but that's just me. Enneagram 8, fiercely compassionate, a disruptor, vulnerable, and open to initiating and holding space for tough conversations. Trace's work is anti-racist, anti-oppressive, uncolonial, non-pathologizing, intersectional, and interdisciplinary approach of trauma-informed and healing-centered engagement. Trace is a member of Track 4 Movement Healers Network, IDHA, New York City School for Transformative Mental Health, and the New York State Trauma-Informed Network. So take it away, Trace.
Thank you so much. Yes. So my name's Trace, they, them. I am two-spirit. I am also multiracial, multi-ethnic. So I actually belong to 3 race categories and 3 or 4 different ethnicities based upon my culture and what I've discovered in my DNA. I am a transracial adoptee. And the interesting thing about that is when people hear that term, they think that it is either referring to gender or they think that it's referring to race. They are wrong when it comes to being referred to gender. Transracial is an adoptee designator that basically means that I'm a BIPOC person who was adopted actually late in my childhood by a couple that was not of my same race, so they were white. I acknowledge that I have genocide showing skin based upon the fact that I am indigenous and I'm Muisca, which is a native tribe in South America. It was one of the first 4 civilizations of the Americas, so the advanced civilizations. And my people were conquered and almost eradicated until now descendants are coming forward by the Spanish conquistadors. So you'll find that I also have Spanish and Portuguese because of that. So we call that genocide showing skin. I am also Romani, which is an interesting thing because typically in what's called Romani Pen, which is our Felicia knows about this, which is our way of life and our laws and things like that. LGBTQ isn't exactly accepted at all. Romani Pen it's not set up for LGBTQ people at all. But there are now finally scholars and activists and advocates are starting to talk about it and how the new Romani Pen needs to change to make sure that it is fair, equal, and equitable for LGBTQIA2S plus people. Um, so I'm also Ashkenazi, which is Jewish. I literally just found out that my Jewish ancestry goes all the way back to Mena, to the Middle East. And so it is very deep, and it was something that was taken away from me as a child. So I am actually in a reclamation process. I've been in a reclamation process for over 20 years, reclaiming my cultural identities. And in that process, I also felt it was time. I actually recently came out. So I came out in 2019 at Pride, and I originally came out and said, well, you know, I'm bisexual, okay. But I didn't tell the whole story because I wasn't ready. And I started pinpointing in my reclamation journey. And as I was going through therapy and everything, I started pinpointing things in my life that really pointed to some things that I was like, whoa, wait a second. Disassociation, not feeling comfortable in my own body ever in my entire life, always feeling as if, you know, rejecting certain parts of my body, not understanding really what that rejection was about, looking in the mirror and seeing something different than other people saw. That was a big one for me, always. As even as a child, that was a huge one for me. Also feeling strange when people, I would get in spaces and people would call me a woman. It actually, and I know this because I'm an embodiment practitioner, it actually produced for me this feeling of tightness in my chest, and my throat would close up and I would just feel really hot in my head. And I didn't know what that was about. I didn't understand it until I got older. I'm 46. So yeah, I came out at the age of 46. So I'm an older non-binary person, and I'm two spirit, and I just was like, and I didn't even know. I'm sitting here with this, I'm indigenous, I'm a member of a tribe, and it actually took another Native person to say to me, no one can keep you from calling yourself two spirit. You are two spirit. You are indigenous and you are two spirit. No one can keep you from that. And that moment of suddenly realizing what this was really all about was like this salve on all the experiences that I had as a child, where I didn't understand what was going on. Why did I look in the mirror and see something different than everybody else saw? Why did I go through things like literally acting like I was on fire when my mother tried to put a dress on me? Like, I didn't understand what that was about. Like, why did it feel that way? And then at the age of 46, it was like, wow, that's what that is. And it was an amazing thing for me. I actually did a podcast the other day. It was an amazing thing for me because I knew that, like, the embodiment part of it, the part where I could finally feel comfortable in my own body, where I felt like I could actually look in the mirror at myself, was finally accessible. And that was a big deal for me, especially as an embodiment practitioner, as a trauma practitioner. Like, wow. And what's really interesting is that since I decided to come out and tell people about this, I am not out to my parents yet. We're still working on it. They're in their almost 80, so we're still working on it. There's an interesting story about my adoptive grandmother that was told to me by my family. When my adoptive grandmother was in elementary school, she went to a one-room schoolhouse. And one day she woke up and she said, her name was Arla Mae. She says, my name's not Arla Mae anymore. And my great grandma, her name was Jackie, was like, what do you mean? My name's not Arla Mae. And she's like, okay, so what is your name? So she gave her mother, my great grandmother, a different name. And she said, also, you're cutting my hair off. So my great grandmother obliged and cut her hair off. And remember, this is back like in like the Depression, right? One room schoolhouse. And she insisted that my great grandmother buzz cut her hair, which in a similar cut that was to, you know, the boys of the time, that was considered masculine, that was considered acceptable. And she also insisted that she be allowed to dress the way she wanted. She didn't want to be referred to as Arla Mae. She wanted to choose a different name. I think one day her name was Tom, the next day it was some other name, and she chose each day what her name was. She cut off all of her hair. She wore a dress, but she insisted on wearing cowboy boots, and we're talking about like cowboy boots. And she insisted that no, she was not wearing petticoats. That's not how it was going to be. And this was during the time when they were taking school pictures too, and every day, and the teacher obliged her as well. And this was during the Depression. And my great grandparents were like, okay, okay. And that is when my grandfather met my grandmother and fell in love with her. And throughout my grandmother's life, she was a trailblazer. Now, she considered herself a woman, but she wasn't the type who would always wear dresses. She didn't conform to anybody's expectations. She worked, which at that time was like, what? She worked at a bank. She worked at a bank her entire life until she was almost 80 years old. And that is also when I go back to that story, whenever I think that maybe I'm not trans enough, maybe I'm not non-binary enough, that, you know, when people have this expectation that non-binary people owe them androgyny or owe them a certain look or have to be a certain way, I go back to that story of my wonderful, wonderful grandmother, who, by the way, still wrote me letters. We wrote letters back and forth until she ended up with dementia, like clear into like her 90s. I go back to that story that my grandmother, my adoptive grandmother, led the way. And at that time, there were no labels on it. She wasn't expected to have a label. She could be whatever she wanted to be from day to day. And my own great grandparents supported that. And if that's possible, if that is possible during the Depression, during a time where gender roles were assigned and you followed them, then it's possible today. And I'm definitely trans enough, and I'm definitely non-binary enough, and I can be the one to define it. Nobody else defines it for me. So that's my story about my grandmother, and that's the thing that sticks with me all the time.
Trace, thank you very much for sharing that. That is an amazing and inspiring story. I love hearing about basically our career history. You know, it says a lot. You know, and I have definitely, my maternal grandmother was someone that had a masculine energy, even though that she identified as a cisgendered female and was in fact the matriarch of the family. She absolutely had a very commanding, I mean, I think in her youth, she was upwards of like 6'1" and kind of built like a linebacker with this like steel gray, you know, beehive and little skinny black cigars that she would smoke holding this clutch, and you just bulletproof. Still my biggest inspiration. So totally relatable. And I think that's just beautiful that that serves as inspiration for you in this generation today. You know, finding your way as you reclaim your identity. I just think that's really marvelous, and I appreciate so much you sharing that story. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring on our next speaker, and Zoe, you're going to be up. So Zoe Camp, she, her, hers. Zoe is your typical stay-at-home mom next door. That is, if you live next door to a bisexual, polyamorous, anti-fascist witch. Zoe identifies as trans feminine and a demigirl. She is a single parent of two beautifully snarky and sassy children. And indeed they are, I have met them. Currently between careers, read as desperately seeking employment, Zoe has worn many hats. In addition to studying psychology at Otterbein University, she has served as a special requirements nursing aide, pharmacy technician, cashier, warehouse grunt, office admin, customer service representative, and IT support technician. Zoe can be described as nerdy, absent-minded, but also quick-witted, a fierce friend, and as resilient as they come. Zoe, it is always a pleasure to turn the mic over to you, so take it away.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Felicia. Thank you, Trace, again, for speaking. Beautiful. I really enjoyed hearing about your experience and your grandmother as well. Small disclaimer, I guess, up front, just because I'm going to be talking a lot about my feelings, some sort of self-destructive feelings about my gender. I personally believe the only reliable way to understand someone's gender is to allow them to self-identify. That being said, I want to give just a tiny tidbit of where I'm coming from, and you'll have to bear with me as it'll probably seem like a tangent, but it is my youth that informed my understanding of gender. And my youth was spent in Newark, Ohio, in Licking County, or as I personally like to call it, Little Appalachia, because it was a very, very conservative Christian community. And I had very little idea about homosexual people growing up, and I had next to no understanding that trans people even existed. I I often joked in a way that my only understanding of trans women, because trans masculine people were not even on my radar clear up until I was probably like 25. My only understanding of trans feminine people, probably up until the time I was like 21, 22, was effectively that they were drag queens. That was the only representation in the media that I had ever seen, mostly because the media that I was sort of required to consume was exclusively evangelical and or Fox News. So I had a very, to put it mildly, I would not be someone you wanted to be friends with in high school. I was not somebody that you wanted to ever be friends with in high school. I was terribly convinced, wholly and completely convinced, that for really the first 29 years of my life, that I was a conservative, evangelical, cisgendered, heterosexual boy. And I boyed hard. I tried real hard. I am an Eagle Scout, which is effectively like saying that I sought out merit badges to tell me that I was a boy. There's nothing that really says you are a try-hard boy like, a woodworking merit badge. And I tried multiple different sports. I tried really hard to be, not that feminine people can obviously not be athletic, but I was not in any capacity. And I thought that athleticism would somehow prove my masculinity. So I tried baseball and basketball, and to my current horror, wrestling. And sweet baby Jesus, was wrestling awful. But when I was 19, I got married when I was 19. that had to do a bit with my notion that I should only ever have sex with one person. And if I'm going to have sex with that person, I better marry them because that's how the world works. Which was narrow, perhaps, at the time, but I was very in love with my wife. And it was only probably as I was with her and felt less pressure over time to be away that I slowly began to feel enough like myself that I could explore gender. Honestly, I really only figured out that I was bisexual after marrying her, so that was always interesting. But she was always very accepting and always very loving. She passed away in 2018, and it was around that time that I decided that if my options were one of two routes. She was the only one who I had ever spoken to about my feelings relating to gender and being trans. And I was definitely still exploring mostly with her, very gender non-conforming and very feeling not masculine, but not knowing what to do with that feeling. And my options then became I could go back in the closet and talk to no one about it ever. Or do a thing about it. And I probably partially motivated by the feelings that I have noticed lots of individuals who have suffered loss feel a sense that time is limited and that you don't want to waste the time available to you. I I started transitioning and went to a couple support groups. Ultimately ended up hosting one of those support groups for a while, which was very strange for me. I felt wholly unqualified to do so. But having said all that, I guess I can actually talk about what being trans was to me. And when I first started my transition, what I realize now is that I was very comfortable performing a role. I was very comfortable with the notion that gender was performing a role. And I knew I didn't want to perform masculinity anymore, and that I was very uncomfortable with that and had always been uncomfortable with that. But I think early in my transition, I began to swing completely the other direction and perform femininity in a way that I thought would be acceptable. I felt very much like I needed answers to all of the questions, both my questions and any possible hypothetical question that anyone might ever ask me about anything. And to that extent, I am basically expert on the Bible in terms of the trans experience, at least in so much as a layman can be. It was a positive experience for the time that it lasted because it did allow me to, it gave me permission to explore femininity in a way that I had denied myself for all of my life. I've told my friends, and I often joke, I was so afraid of appearing feminine or expressing femininity that like I had to wear baggy jeans. Like tight jeans were never going to be a thing. I wouldn't wear flip-flops because flip-flops were too feminine. Like I exaggerated I repressed super hard, but it gave me an opportunity to do all of the things that I had withheld from myself. So in that respect, the seeking things out that I thought made someone feminine or that justified my femininity was helpful in that I allowed myself to have those things. Where it became a slippery slope was when I could no longer recognize whether I was performing my gender based on an authentic sense of myself, and my desires and my feelings? Or was I performing my gender now back in a different bubble? Was I performing my gender to what I believed everyone else's expectations were of me? I have, now that I have been out for full time since not that long, I guess. I've only been out full time for about 2 years. Now that I have spoken to a lot of other trans people, my experience of gender now is that I no longer feel a need to explain myself. I no longer feel a need to justify why I am, or why I want what I want, or diagnose some reason why I am who I am, or why I want what I want. I know I am trans femme. I know I'm a demigirl. And I just know these things about myself in the same way that I know that I am kind. I know that I am a decent friend, not because I have people reassuring me all of the time, but because I know this about myself. And I am giving myself permission to enjoy things again, or behave in a way again that isn't classically feminine, because I felt some need to be classically feminine. I felt some need to, in essence, I had overcompensated in terms of masculinity, and I felt some need, I believe, to overcompensate in terms of femininity. And I'm definitely at a more relaxed point in my life now, and that's the only reason I feel comfortable finally talking about myself as a less than 100% binary woman, because I deeply feared, that I would not be able to give an appropriate explanation as to why I felt that way. And now I just don't have any desire to give an explanation of why I feel that way. I just am. And so to that effect, it is my desire when interacting with any other trans people that I accept what they tell me at face value, that I require no explanation or dissertation on the thesis of what it means to be non-binary from them, just to accept that they are in fact non-binary, that they use pronouns that I have never even heard of, or that they, have some experience with gender that is unusual to me. I don't need them to explain themselves anymore, because I don't feel a need to explain myself anymore. That's mostly my whole talk. We'll add a note on the end that I'm serious. I was not kidding with Felicia. If you have a job opening, they need to be sent my way. I'm not playing.
Thank you for that, Zoe. As always, you are a spectacular speaker, and as well as being very, in touch, you're also very entertaining. I just love your heart so much, really, and your story is, I think, very inspiring, and just everything. So thank you for that, really. Okay, well, a lot of things being covered here, hiding and a sense of trying to fit in. And I think that speaks a lot to the theme for trans people, because it's perhaps not everyone's story, but it is a common thread that there is this need to, this is the cards I was dealt, and I'm going to try and make them work for me and try and fit in and be accepted. Definitely part of my story. So as we are moving along here, I'm going to bring up our next speaker. Our next speaker is Kieve Rodiver, they, them, theirs. Kieve identifies as non-binary, androgynous, and transmasculine simultaneously. This polyamorous queer is a local artist and an adjunct professor in Otterbein University's Art and Art History Department. They got their Masters of Fine Arts from Columbus College of Art and Design, which is where I met them, with a thesis focusing on trans identity, dysphoria, and disassociation from the body. Their current work explores the process of going through therapy in the hopes of finding a visual vocabulary about healing from trauma. They are also a rotating volunteer non-binary support group facilitator for Octopus LLC, a fly-by-night podcast host for Please Touch the Arts, a fan of sci-fi and media criticism, and Coffee Wolf. I love that expression. Their superpower is forgetfulness juxtaposed with an endless wealth of art theory facts, and their greatest 2021 achievement is impressing their students with the silly names of their pets. It is my esteemed pleasure to welcome Kiave to the stage.
Hi, I am Kiave. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. At the top of this talk, I want to say and apologize, I suppose, for I don't think that I can talk about this unscripted. So I did script myself, so it is a little bit different than everybody else's. And I also will be partially reading because I don't have a memory that works very well. At the top, I would like to say there are some trigger warnings for what I have to say. Transphobia, abuse, sex, intense gender dysphoria, needles in reference to, and used as though I'm talking about intravenous, homophobia, biphobia, academic trauma, threat of violence, and suicidal ideation. All right, are we good to go? Is everybody safe? All right, let's go. What is my trans identity? Artist, academic, painter, vintage Raleigh Mixty Envy blue bike that matched yours before your concussion, ooh-woo soft boy? Accept us all without full understanding. Tell me about you though. Can I paint you? Can you paint me? What parts of us do we see? That's why I don't paint friends often. I won't see you right. Just let me talk. My favorite flag is the genderqueer flag. I like it because back when I was anonymously and consensually messaging you, and you knew that I wasn't anybody but me, because I was a lesbian who's only a little genderqueer. Am I a hasbian? Are Wesleyan lesbians still allowed to sleep with girls after graduation? I'm sorry I called you that, Kat, but you are my queer icon, and I wasn't ready to lose the possibility of a queer role model after graduation. It's funny that I'm a stereotype, right? It scares me how unremarkable I feel until I'm the only one. My therapist told me I don't have to be unique or interesting to deserve to be an artist. I hope the same is true about an uwu soft NB hipster boy. My personal viewpoints of the trans identity are my own experience. My identity is a series of not that. Even non-binary is a not, and that sucks because I have a gender. I know because it screams in a dissonance between C and D. I named it androgyny because even though I'm transmasculine, I really care about the slipperiness, a footnote in Judith Butler's overly verbose gender trouble. And my birth happened just in time to be after the schism between queer theory and second wave feminism. Well, sort of. There are still churfs. Am I trans? Yeah, but I've been non-binary longer. When I was crushing my boobs into a sports bra 3 times too small, was I just as trans as when I was a lyric soprano in an evening gown? Except our new words, new words, and noise. Do you remember when we were close, before you got married and we stopped talking? You bounced on my dorm room bed, excited to talk to me about being a boy at our all-women's college and your friends in Atlanta and how much I would love them. But this one person on Tumblr wasn't really trans. Like, who identifies as F to M, transitioning to female? A transgender. And my mouth agreed, but my brain said, but what if? Start with my body add a shoulder and a better eyebrow shelf and some stubble, but keep the eyeliner and the lipstick. The narrative is not for you, but for us and for them and her and Faye. And you, I don't know who you are anymore. After you told me you wanted to kill me, I lost track. But when we were fucking my senior year, you were, I don't know, just not a girl. I asked to wear your boy clothes to the mall, see if anyone was fooled. And you said, why would someone like you want to do that? I didn't reply because what if I'm like you? I just took the blunt from your oil-painted, heavy metal tainted fingers again in your red car and stared at the brick of the art building. I am different. He is different, and so is Z. I almost wrecked my car before the pandemic hit when you told me that your polycule had a one penis policy. I felt so dumb that I never told you how aware of my AFAB body I was. Months of debating, but in the end, the pandemic came first. And I never got to ask, how much of a girl do you think I am? Listen to me, love me. I'm sorry, Kelly. We were 18 when I met you, and you were the first person who told me that you wanted to be a boy after graduation. I didn't see you then. Hell, I wasn't even straight then. Listen to us, to Noi, to them, to Zur. Usually the amount of surprise dates I've been on is really funny. But if one more person I've only met once introduces me as their girlfriend at a party, I won't be sitting on their lap, too embarrassed to leave, hopefully. Walking rom-com misgendered again. Recognize our cries for help, or hers, or theirs. Do you remember when we met? I was freshly in Ohio. I made you pick me up from school because you stood me up that first time. I didn't know you were a trans girl. You passed so well. So it felt like a big deal to me when I told you my pronouns on that first date. But later that night when we were naked and I was on top of you, you called me a girl. And it took everything in me not to beg you to take me home. Welcome us, him and Fair too. Or a month or so later, after I picked you up from third shift, pounding coffee and eating your home cooking, you said I had it easy because I could turn my presentation on and off, and meanwhile, you chose to be a girl full time, and that was so hard. Ask me questions. I want to answer them. Do you remember when you helped me land that job at a gay bar and you were pantry and I was fry and dish and dessert? You got so drunk that night that you threw up on yourself. I put you in the shower, but you begged me to come and hold you under the water. I didn't want to because I was on my period and I didn't want you to know, but I held you anyway and washed your hair and cried. And you cried too because I was bleeding and you couldn't. Validate those answers. When I shaved my head because I thought I would help people see I wasn't a girl at school, or while I handed out caramel macchiatos, you called me a bull dyke. Don't assume we aren't one of you. How about when you told me you were polyam and I asked, do you want to hook up again? But you told me, no, you've taken testosterone and I'm a lesbian. It's a compliment. I'm validating your gender. And I just stopped taking it because it was the last straw it took to swear me off the needle. Was I a girl when you slept with me over and over? Ask us. Did I stop doing testosterone because I wanted to, or because the needle reminded me of that night? The only time he, my shop buddy with our matching Band-Aids, he left bruises, and he told me that if I told anyone, they would believe it was his fault and not mine because he was more masculine than me. Or is it because I wasn't pretty to you anymore? Am I still trans if I don't pick up the needle again? Is my dysphoria less valid? Sometimes I still feel as gatekept as always, even though I'm welcome now, usually. Do you remember when I was on a highway ramp and I made that lesbian joke? You told me I wasn't allowed, only girls are lesbians. But it hurt so bad because if I wasn't a lesbian and I wasn't trans yet, then what community did I have my first year as an NB? My personal viewpoints of the trans identity are only my experience. But do you remember that trans advocacy event at Cafe Kerouac? I was so excited. I was taking notes. I was bent over, so my binder made it so hard to breathe. I was so excited that I came to talk to you after, to ask you what I could do. And you said, you can be an ally. And I just said, okay. And then you started talking to my girlfriend who was trans. But I wasn't trans yet, just non-binary, so I was just an ally being suffocated by my binder. A year later, you gave me a non-binary flag at Pride. You didn't recognize me. I never went to a Trans Ohio event. I really wanted to, but I wasn't trans yet. Do you remember when I stood in front of my artwork and you asked me, but why do you think trans people are sad? And I didn't know what to say. I was so embarrassed. I gazed at the floor as you chewed me out and told me that none of your trans friends were sad. They were all happy and fully realized people. What is my trans identity? There are a string of trans folk, mostly girls, who only told me after I'd tasted them and left hickeys down their necks, I don't understand what non-binary is. But at least you knew me and saw me true enough to say, but that doesn't matter because I'm not non-binary. And you meowed and cuddled closer. Listen to me. Love me. Do you remember during that final crit, I had started taking tallies of how often someone misgendered me in front of the photo of myself, taking off my binder where I'd painted out my face, but left my nipples to gaze at the audience? And you finally saw me, and then asked me why I'd never told anyone I was trans. And I gestured at my paintings, I sputtered, and reminded you that day one of class I introduced myself with my pronouns, and no one answered back with theirs, and then it was my fault for not reminding you. And we sat, awkwardly, in silence while I cried over months of being read as a cis person stealing trans space. It's funny that I'm a stereotype, right? I know it doesn't matter because the painting was never for you, but I was drowning trying to impress you. I had an A in that class, but I dropped out of college anyway. I still don't know if it was because my boyfriend pushed my roommate down the stairs Christmas Eve, or if it was the inability to exist after you told me I didn't paint well enough to do what I was trying to do. Am I trans? Yeah, but I've been non-binary longer, and I just wept. I thought, how can I be an artist if you can't tell the paintings about me? That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Kieve. That was magnificent. You have such an incredible voice, and I am really, really honored that we were able to create a space where you could come and share that with us. You know, I've known Kieve since they were in grad school. At that time, I had finished grad school and was teaching at CCAD. And we had a lot of interesting conversations, and both of us were there for each other's earlier steps in our journeys, respectively. And identity came up quite a bit because, you know, identity is sticky, and that is something that we touch on in Trans Talks or T Talks quite often. You know, we're never really just one thing. We are an amalgam of many things, and that's just any human person. And if you are one of the people who are tuned in tonight watching this, I hope that you can see an aspect of your own life story in these stories that we're sharing tonight, because it's very true. And each of us has our own experience, and each of us is valid. And however we wish to identify, if we are off that, if we have strayed away from the cis identity that we may have been assigned, if we have rejected the compulsory orientation that perhaps society suggests we should follow, it is my belief, at least, that this includes you under the term of transgender. And I really believe that tonight's talk was very important for this, for exactly the reasons that Kieve was touching on, how there is such a disconnect between what that is and what that can be. So thank you very much. Thank you. Kieve was very crucial in the impetus of getting the wording right for this event, because, you know, I think there is a lot of discourse on what is the best way to open the door, what is the best way to invite all identities, into this space or any space that's like this. And they are an integral piece of my own heart, and I'm very glad they're here today. For all of my own faults and sometimes stumbling over concepts as I can do. So very gracious, and again, thank you. So that brings us, that brings us to me as we get towards the end of this. So I am Felicia, if you want to let me know already, hello. I have a complicated transition story. And yes, you are very welcome being here. So I was actually talking to my wife, Gwen. I was like, Gwen, how do I talk about this, actually? Because I have a very complicated relationship with my trans identity. So the best way for me to do it is to give you a base rundown, and I will also throw in some trigger warnings, abuse, and transphobia, and some othering. But anyway, just be advised and go deeper. I've mentioned before in different talks that I understood that I was not the gender I was assigned when I was 6, because I actually thought that it was who I am from day one. It wasn't until I saw someone else and realized that the equipment was different, so to speak. I suffered through this conflict of identity all the way up through when puberty began. And I remember one of my first explorations in trying to claim myself for myself. I was 12, and my mother came home unexpectedly that day because I thought I had the whole day to myself. I had this ugly floral sundress and these ridiculous jellies that I like to wear. And I had ordered through a mail order catalog a very Florida themed palette of makeup because I was living in Florida at the time. So, ridiculous electric pinks and greens that really didn't have any place on my face. But I tried to find myself in the mirror, because one of my biggest issues was feeling as though I was effectively riding shotgun in my own body, and that the image in the mirror that I was seeing was not me, and I felt invisible in my own life. My mother came home after I had kind of started to see who I was, and for a brief moment I was excited and scared to reveal my truth to her. It did not go well. My mother was very heavy-handed. I won't go into detail, but it meant not leaving the house for 2 weeks, because the steadfast rule in the house was no one is to know what goes on behind these doors, lest I receive more of the same. Typically, she focused below the collar, but not this time. So I had to stay home while I healed. I had to stay away from my friends. I had to be cut off and disconnected from what little joys I could find. I was taught how to hide. Now, Trace mentioned before, this kind of rigid, prescriptive environment growing up as I did in, on the outskirts of an immigrant community, being Roma, and my family was very big on assimilating, which means that if you appear one way, you live amongst that community in a kind of hiding to avoid being abused or discriminated against or becoming the subject of hate crime. So I was told to hide my Roma identity and assimilate. We're just Americans. We live in this neighborhood. We're just Americans. We speak English. That's all anyone needs to know. who we are, what our family is. It's no one else's business. We just keep it to ourselves. And again, this was reiterated to me as a child. And then my mother reiterated to me that who I am as a woman, who I am as a human being, needed to be hidden, needed to be kept secret, needed to be kept away, because my lesson that I learned was I will be abused, I will be called out, I will be hurt, I will be placed in harm's way, and my life devalued, and me being left rendered invisible. And that was my life experience for so long, was this sense of being invisible in a crowded room, of no one seeing me for who I really was, everyone trying to impose an identity upon me, and I did what I could to fit in. The more I conformed, the more I fit in, I would say to myself, the less likely they are to harm me, the more likely I will feel accepted, and then my life won't be so stressful. I was bullied in school. I was always the new kid because my mother wanted to run from my father, so we never stayed in one place for very long. I never really unpacked. I would just throw a towel over boxes and turn those into shelves or podiums for things, and I could repack my life in less than an afternoon, and we'd be gone the next day. So I was always the new kid in a town, in a school. People would refer to me as exotic. I often got the question, "What are you?" And I don't know if they were trying to be cruel or if they just really wanted to know because they were sensing something that I wasn't willing to share. But I heard that, "What are you?" And people that figured me out would oftentimes call me bad slurs that I'm not gonna repeat here, but they were slurs against my Roma identity. They were slurs against my family having immigrated from Sicily. They were bad. And I learned to fake it. I learned to be what people expected, because it was the path of least resistance, and it meant that perhaps I'd have an opportunity to have a friend group. I'd have an opportunity to be accepted in social environments and churches, even within my own family. My own father referred to me as half-breed and muttler, which is very painful, even from someone that I didn't respect and I never felt love for. So this I carried with me all through college. And in college, as I got to graduation, I had something of a breakdown. There had been moments where I'd be able to express who I was. I had friends, and we hung out in the goth industrial scene where gender was inherently a fluid thing. Everyone had mascara. Everyone had some kind of makeup. Everyone was flowing, and there was so much exploration. It was a safe space, and I gotta tell you, I really dig the music, so it was also fun. Dancing like a tree in the wind, sweeping the floor, draped in black, not too different than right now. And it gave me an opportunity to let myself see myself. I wasn't even concerned about other people seeing me. I wanted to see myself, and I never did. Who I was had been put into a tiny little box when I was a 12-year-old, and she never got to come out, really. So after all of this pressure buildup, when I graduated, I hit a wall. And a lot of that was self-inflicted. I had this carrot in front of me. Life would be great so long as I can go to art school, but I never considered what would happen when I finally finished and graduated. I had a breakdown. And I ended up at a clinic. And they're the ones who said, "Hey, you've got really bad gender dysphoria." So they put me on HRT. Now, I'm 47 now. And I was 23, maybe 24 when I learned this about myself, and they started putting me on hormone replacement therapy. But it was the early days of this. There wasn't the internet like we have now. You know, it was in its infancy. There were no online communities. I hadn't met anyone to my knowledge who had similar life experience. I didn't have anyone to identify with. I just had this doctor giving me permission to explore the potential of my identity. And in this time frame, we're talking 22 years ago and such, the language we have for now for the trans universe didn't exist. Who we are, our identity, even the right terminology wasn't a thing. You know, you had you had to jump through many hoops to basically be allowed to come out of the closet, validate your identity, get permission to see a medical doctor who would decide if it was okay for you to transition, because at that time there was this notion that if you could not transition successfully and invisibly blend in with cis culture and a cis lifestyle, then you weren't trans enough, and therefore you couldn't transition. And the anxiety and the pressure, well, how can I do this? I was just out of art school. I was dirt broke. I didn't eat very much because I didn't have money. So I'm on HRT, and using today's terms, I was living a gender fluid, or as Kieve mentioned, a kind of androgynous presentation. For me, that wasn't the right presentation. For me, that wasn't the right expression, and it made things a lot worse for me, because I felt I was this close to being able to be myself, but I couldn't get there. And it felt unsafe. And I had one or two friends that had brought hormones in from different countries that would give me these vials and these needles, but no real instructions on how do I take this? How often do I take this? What is too much? What is too little? What should I expect? I had nothing to work from, and I felt very unsafe and very unhealthy, and constantly invalidated, my anxiety through the roof, my mental health failing more and more, because it was just not, it wasn't who I needed to see in the mirror. So I stopped and put everything back and packed it away in an even smaller box deep in my head, and focused so much on other people, focused so much on my art career, and didn't give a second thought about it. And years went by, and I'm in grad school, and it's 2012. And I started thinking about my thesis project. And my thesis project had a lot to do with authenticity. I didn't really know what authenticity was, because everything about my life was about hiding. It was having a great big wall between me and the rest of the world. I was protecting myself from abuse. I was protecting myself from othering. I was protecting myself from myself, because I have a bad habit of self-destruction. I didn't trust what I felt, and I didn't know where to turn. And a lot of personal things happened in my life and within my marriage. And in 2014, I started allowing myself some exploration, and it took a while. But in 2015, I started letting people see me a little bit more, until 2016, when I really started to transition, and that's when I committed. And I'll never forget the first day that I took the time to express exactly the way I felt, to release the person that I had always been. And I saw her for the first time in the mirror. The first thought I had was, ah, there you are. Where the fuck have you been? I'm so sorry. And that was the start of my real transition at that point, after a really big pause. And one of the things I promised myself was to come out of everything. I stopped hiding that I am Roma, and I started embracing my cultural identity that for the longest time was private. I started reaching out to more community, because it's important to me. The crux of my identity, the core of my identity, is wrapped up in not just me being an artist, because being an artist is more of who I am rather than what I do, but also in my identity as a Roma, and that really great blend with Sicilian folklore and Sicilian heritage, because my family was there for a couple of generations before running to the United States to get away from all that pain and damage and violence, to try and have a better existence. I saw so many parallels between the immigrant side of my family and my own journey, trying to figure out my gender identity, my orientation, admitting that I'm attracted to men, admitting that I'm actually pansexual, and that I am a female person. My story what trans looks like to me is embracing a feminine approach. I think for the longest time, I ran to the polar extreme because I was so leaning against this male archetype of what everyone told me it was to be a male and what I was expected to be and how I was supposed to fit in and what that was supposed to look like. And I had this suit that I wore. When I took that off, ricocheted to the extreme opposites, and I went very hyper femme for a few years before I calmed down and started recognizing my own journey. And I think that that's an important thing for anyone in the trans umbrella who has any level of a trans identity. It's important to figure out, what does it mean for me? What does it mean for me? Because it's very personal. And we've heard some stories, right? For me, my trans identity was a combination of a full expression of what a feminine identity is in my family and what that means to me as a Roma person and as a Roma woman. Allowing myself to explore the expressions of my heritage and finding where that fits in. I still don't like floral prints, but I will wear the traditional braids, and I often wear a head covering out of modesty and because I am married. And I love a tiered skirt and I love a V-neck. But I'm also very metal. I'm also very goth. I came up in the punk scene, so floral doesn't work for me. So I have to find that in between, and I love it. It is artistic for me. It is an expression of figuring out, who am I in this world? Who am I in this identity? What does it mean to me? Who is Felicia to me? And I'm just damned if I will let myself be gatekept or told to me who Felicia is and what my trans identity is supposed to look like. I was literally told, and I don't want to go too long because I know I'm going long. I was told when I was first in my transition, like within the first year or so, by older generation of trans women. They had transitioned in the 80s, early 80s. And no disrespect, but they had a different expectation. And I had a little piece of that the first time I tried to transition, this idea that if you don't do the hormones, do the surgery, find a way to blend in to cis heteronormative culture, you're not really trans. I was told that point. That drove my anxiety to new heights. And I did my best to hide it, and I laughed it off because that's what I do. I go to inappropriate jokes when I feel horrible. And I try to cover it up. And I spent my artistic life exploring this in secret, and I don't judge that. I don't judge that individual because that's their trans identity, that's their trans story, and it's valid. But I got a real education when I was at CCAD. When I was just starting to come out, I got invited by some of the students there to be a facilitator for the Gender and Sexuality Alliance, the Queer Alliance of that school. Sorry, my system froze. And this is when I learned the full dialogue going on about the trans experience, all the different amazing identities, all the categories and subcategories, and there's so many options of how to identify. And once I had a glimpse of what something other than a gender binary was, it was a revelation, because of course there isn't a binary. Of course it is far more complicated than that. I thought of my own grandmother and her appearance, being very masculine and still yet identifying as a cisgendered woman. There's a lot of gray area, and the gray area is just fantastic. It's beautiful. It's so freeing to have an opportunity to know that whatever the end result is, whatever my journey tells me I am, whatever Felicia reveals herself to be, to me and to the world and to my friends, is correct. There is not a right or a wrong. My voice is exactly right. The way that I look is exactly right. The way that I am built is exactly right. I did have a little bit of surgery because it was necessary for me and not for anyone else. I don't require validation, and I will be damned if I ever hide any aspect of myself ever again. But at the same time, I'm embracing this idea of constantly evolving, of constantly exploring. Who Felicia is today may not be who she is in 10 years. I don't know yet. But I like who she is today. I like how other people treat her. And when I get misgendered, because that happens, when people approach me and tell me that I'm not woman enough, or tell me I'm not trans enough because I didn't do A or B, I say, I respect your journey. You don't really have a right to tell me what my journey is, and we'll have to agree to disagree. I won't let myself get pushed into a corner. I won't be put into a position to fight like that anymore. This is how I fight. I invite my friends into a conversation. We do education, we build community, and I think it's very important we continue to have these brave spaces to create safe spaces so that anyone, whatever your gender identity is, so that you know, if nowhere else, you are seen, you are heard here. Because I know that I'm seen and heard by you. And I will respect your gender pronouns. I will respect your identity because I know you respect mine. And this is the first step. We are in a state of evolution. How it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago is nowhere near the way that it is now. We have come so far. But yeah, we've got a long ways to go. It might be another 20 years before there isn't a need for these conversations. But I think as long as we keep having these conversations, as long as we invite our allies and our family and our friends to listen, as long as we talk to each other, as long as we validate each other and accept each other, I think we're going to get there. So that was my bit. So this is bringing us to the end of another trans talk, another trans storytelling. I want to thank everybody who came today to attend, and especially to my beautiful speakers. I am so grateful for you. I see, I hear, and love you all very much, and I am so glad that we are in community together. And tune in next month when we'll do another topic about something else. And we'll just keep marching this forward. And thank you again to Wild Goose for being such an ally and such a great facilitator. Have a beautiful rest of your month. I hope your year is amazing. Let's kick ass.
Thank you, everybody.